Hello everybody. I think we're live now. So let's go ahead and get your link available so that you can start watching. Okay, yes, it does say we're streaming live, so that is awesome. Let's open up YouTube here, get ready for some streamception. I'm sure we'll hear myself here in just a second. You know, I really wish that we didn't have to start every stream this way, but how else to do it? Get you this permanent link here. Okay, good to go. This announcement will explain pretty much everything that's going on this week, and really into the next week and a half, honestly. But anyway, okay, so you should have the link now, and that announcement. So hopefully we'll be seeing some folks soon in the live stream. Okay, so now we are ready to roll. And we've got a lot of things to cover today, so we're just going to jump right on into it. First things first, as I am kind of rambling here and setting up the slide, your intro speeches, I have looked at all of them. Basically, the way I'm grading those, and I think I mentioned this a couple times before it was due, and then last week after it was due. That I will be, basically it's kind of like a completion grade. If you made a good faith effort to do that assignment, I'll basically give you all 50 points associated with it. And if you just plain didn't turn it in, I take off points. I didn't do a lot of evaluation with it. Again, the purpose of that assignment was to get you used to the technology. I worked with a lot of you getting things ready, helping you upload. So that was exactly what that assignment was supposed to do. So I know that as a group you took it seriously. So as a group, the vast majority of you will receive full credit for that. So that's awesome. I just did not get an opportunity to go through the gradebook before this broadcast tonight. I'm already a half hour behind. It's time to get rolling. So let's go ahead and get started here. So persuasion basics. The last speech and the next speech of the semester is a persuasive speech. I do see that the view account's ticking up there. If you do have any questions, feel free to stop me. Do keep in mind that there is a good 20-second delay. So I might see your question, but the relevant time was 20 seconds ago. But we'll deal with that. Anyway, the point is, what I'm trying to describe here is that the next speech is the persuasive speech. And a persuasive speech, in a nutshell, is a speech where you try to convince someone to do or believe something they don't already do or believe. All right? That's what makes a persuasive speech different from an informative speech. Informative speech kind of comes from a position of neutrality. It's like the old school journalism, right? You kind of, if there is a controversial topic in an informative speech, the person tries to give a good representation, or even I would say a positive representation of both or all sides of the controversy so that the audience can make their own decisions, and it's just to inform the audience. Persuasion is different. You take a position, you declare what that position is, and you want the audience to also agree with that position. So, it is a different beast, and we're going to talk about how to construct one of these messages. The first thing that we need to look at, though, is the anatomy of a persuasive speech. All persuasive speeches contain a proposition, which is a statement of what should be true or done. And they come in three varieties. And if you think about whatever proposition is before Congress or before you or before your boss, it's going to fall into one of these three categories. A proposition of value, for example, is pretty much what it describes. It's a proposition trying to determine the worth of something. And this can either be literal or abstract. And so an example of a literal value proposition in a persuasive speech might be something like, the Nintendo Switch is not worth the $400 price tag. I have 3 reasons why this is true, and then blah 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 blah. So that's a literal interpretation of the word of a value speech. But it could also be abstract, such as people who smoke in public areas are immoral because of the secondhand smoke risk. That is also a value statement, but it's abstract. It's talking about the morality of something or the rightness of something. So value speech is kind of fallen, within value, there's kind of those 2 ideas. But if you are talking about something's worth, or whether it's good or bad or high quality or low quality, worth money or not worth money, that is a proposition of value. The next category of persuasive propositions is that of policy. And policy propositions are easy to recognize because in the English language, we pretty much have no other way of saying a policy proposition without using the words should or perhaps the word ought. Okay, so if you hear the word should or ought, it is a proposition of policy. So for example, I can say something like, I got a parking ticket at Ball State the other day, and I really feel that there should not be a penalty during the summer when no one is on campus. Policy statements are statements about what should happen. Right? They're kind of like the second part of this definition over here. They are statements of what should be done. All right. So in this case, what should be done is that there should be no parking enforcement over the summer. And so the words should and ought just kind of give away that it's a policy proposition. Good luck to you, but in any case, if you try to do a policy proposition without the word should or ought in the English language anyway, kudos to you if you can find a way around that puzzle. So if you're ever in a situation where you're listening to a speaker and they use the word should or ought, they're trying to talk about policy. It's not necessary that the policy not involve formal legislation. Any kind of something that should happen or should not happen in some cases is a proposition of policy. And that maybe is confusing because when we think of the word policy, we do think about a formal legislation in a colloquial sense. But here again, we're really just kind of talking in generalities here. If you want something to happen, you're proposing a policy. Even if it's not a formal legislative bill to go before a voting body. Okay. Lastly, we have propositions of fact. This is probably the most self-explanatory of these on the list. This is basically just a statement, and you're trying to convince people whether it's true or false. So, a proposition of fact would be humans are the driving force behind global warming. Right? That's a proposition of fact. Now again, just because you have a proposition of fact doesn't necessarily make that statement 100% true always. But if you're trying to convince somebody that something is true, then you're going down the proposition of fact. Now all of these propositions, these different types of propositions, you will tackle them in very similar ways. We do have an entire class called Debate and Argumentation that gets way into different strategies for each of these areas, but there is one organization pattern that you can use regardless of any of these different types of propositions. The thing that you do need to be aware of, though, is what type of proposition your proposal or your proposition is, because that will affect the things that you say, not necessarily the way that you organize it. And we'll kind of explain that a bit in a second when we talk about constructing your arguments and your main points. Besides when you have a persuasive speech, besides the idea of having a proposition, an explicit statement of what you want the audience to believe or do, you will also have a position on this proposition. So it'll be either you are for or against the proposition. So, for example, most persuasive speeches are in favor of whatever proposition the speaker is proposing. However, they have been clever people throughout history, and students that I've had in class that will create a proposition, and then over the course of their introduction, not the whole speech, but over the course of their introduction, they will introduce the idea that they're actually against whatever the idea is that they're introducing to the audience. Perhaps a famous example of this, and now my mind goes blank as soon as my second monitor fries out there. I had notes over there. There is a famous work of writing that a British parliamentarian had written during the Irish potato famine, and he proposed a policy resolution basically saying that we can solve the Irish potato famine without spending any money if we allow the Irish to eat their own children. Obviously, he suggested such a horrible, ghastly thing because he was against his own proposition, but he was also using it as a commentary against his fellow parliament members because he felt they were very heartless, not trying to give the Irish people any kind of assistance during the potato famine. So he said, if we're not going to give them any food from England, then we might as well just tell them to eat their own children. That was the comment he was making through a non-serious, satirical. Satirical doesn't necessarily mean always humorous, but he was satirizing that point of view by pointing out the absurdity, or what he felt was the absurdity. So you can do something like that. If you feel like you're very artful, you can bring open a proposition that you can artfully kind of deconstruct as the point of your persuasive speech. However, I kind of recommend the go for the gut approach, the go for the throat approach here. Introduce a proposition and then be in favor of it, and that way people, it's easier to write that way. But if you want to be artful, you can go ahead, but don't get confused. I think the straight approach of proposing something and then being in favor of it is the best way to go, honestly. I did want to talk to you that they did have every speaker proposes something, and then they also explicitly state whether or not they're for or against it. It doesn't really matter as long as you make a decision whether you're for or against the proposition, and then you stay that way throughout the rest of your speech. This is not a time to try to give an even coverage of both sides of an issue, or more sides of an issue, is I guess what I'm trying to explain here. The last speech and in journalism class, definitely try to give a fair treatment of both sides. In this one, you're trying to be honest and you're trying to be fair, but there is no question that you are on one side or the other. That's what we're trying to communicate here. So, yes. Next, any kind of persuasive speech, regardless of how you organize it, contains reasons and examples that kind of do the following ideas. They identify a problem, and you need to relate it to your position on a proposition. So, for example, this is kind of a common speech that I see, especially in my in-person sections, is on-campus smoking. So they'll say something like, they may propose a policy like, I feel like there needs to be more smoking areas on campus, or designated smoking areas, that is. And they would say the problem with the way the campus is now, with only 2 smoking areas, is that people will basically go underground and smoke in really dangerous places like janitorial closets, restrooms, places where you don't want people smoking, simply because they can't be bothered to literally walk to one extreme of the campus or the other extreme of the campus to find the 2 designated smoking places. And so that's what we mean by identify a problem. So you would propose something, and then you would want to identify a problem that you think that doing what you want might solve. Okay. You have to outline why that problem exists, and you have to explain why it won't fix itself. All right, so part of that speech might include saying something like, because human beings are like, this is something that I learned from a student, not learned, but this phrasing. Human beings are like electrons. They take the path of least resistance if it's at all available. So because human nature is that way, students will continue to smoke in janitorial closets and restrooms as long as there are few designated smoking places on campus. Right? Whether or not you agree with that assessment of humanity right now is not important, but the idea is the same. You try to outline why that problem exists and why it won't fix itself. In this case, they're saying it's just human nature to smoke in convenient places, right? Regardless of whether or not you're supposed to be there. So next, you may detail a possible solution, or you would ask the audience to act. Both of these things are very related, all right? So whatever you ask the audience to do, if it's not a direct solution, should be working towards a solution. And by that I mean, maybe the solution is the passage of a new law. However, your audience, i.e. students and professor in Comm 210 online, our ability to write and pass legislation is quite limited. So your solution or the action you want us to do might be to write our local representative and have them create or vote on legislation that might solve the problem, right? And that's the best way to do persuasive speeches is, yes, you can support a bill or a law that is pending as a solution to a problem, but you do want to include something that the audience you actually have can do to advance whatever it is that you are proposing. So since we can't take direct action on creating smoking safe places on campus, you might ask us to sign a petition, for example, to get more smoking spots on campus. So those are just some general examples of what we're talking about here. Now, in your book, normally I would let's watch this and I'd have the audience interact, but there's only 2 or 3 people here, and I think all 2 or 3 people are me, because I have several viewers open to make sure that the broadcast is going. I'm going to go ahead and skip that because I don't think we'll have a lot of interaction to do that with. But in your book, and you will find a persuasive, it's actually called the group speech outline. During a normal semester for on-campus students, we have something called a group speech. For reasons that I think are fairly apparent, the course kind of advances too fast over the summer, and it's difficult to organize groups online. So we're not assigned that speech over the summer. However, the outline for it is what we call the Monroe's motivated sequence, and this is actually the kind of outline that you want to write for basically any persuasive speech in life. So it is labeled group speeches outline, but it is Monroe's motivated sequence, and it is in your workbook if you look at it. But it contains the same basic information that I'm about to detail here. So, like your informative outline, you'll have a topic statement, you have topic identification, a specific purpose, and a thesis statement. In this case, the thesis statement is going to be whatever your proposition is. There should be more smoking places on campus. Students shouldn't give speeches about tying shoes. It is morally wrong to peel a banana from the bottom up. Whatever. The last one was really silly, but the point is the thesis statement's what your proposal is. So whatever you propose is going to be your thesis statement. And your introduction is going to be very similar to what you've already done. Okay. You want to focus the audience's attention on the problem. All right. So that's basically the same thing as gaining their attention. Okay. Steps A and B here are basically that step kind of separated out. want to identify the problem, focus their attention on it, and you want to do that by tying the audience to it. So a way to get them involved, an example, if your speech is about getting more designated smoking spots on campus, you can say something like, one of the things I've noticed about Ball State is that there are cigarette butts in the hallways around the restrooms. And I, for one, feel like that's a very poor statement about how we care for campus. And I feel that if you feel that way too, then if you don't want smelly cigarette butts hanging around in the hallway next to your classroom, I feel like we should. Then we go to, the order of these things can adjust based on your grammar, and this is going to be an example of that. So you could say, if that really bothers you, like it bothers me, then I think we should embrace the solution of actually creating more designated smoking places on campus. Over the course of this speech, I will have 3 reasons why this will solve the littering in the hallway issue, and then blah 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 blah. That would be the thesis and the preview right there. You would also need to include, just like you did in your informative speeches, some credibility material. And what that is simply a statement about why you are a credible person to talk to us about this issue. And it really can be, especially for the purposes of a classroom assignment or an online class assignment, as the case may be, that you say something like, I have been researching this issue for the past week and a half, and I have found a solution or information that is critical to resolving this issue that I am talking about. Okay, it really can be that simple. Later in life, your credibility material might be things like, I have a degree in architecture, and I am therefore on my senior project, I made a green building that took advantage of smoking places on campus for, I don't even know how that would. We harvested the hot air from all that smoking in those areas. See, that kind of fell apart on me, but you kind of get the idea. As you get older, as you get more experience, your credibility material will probably get more impressive. But for right now, it's just about building a habit. So you can just be honest with the audience and say, I have researched this topic for the week and a half that I was assigned this speech. Based on that research, here's what I feel is the best. And then you go on with the rest of your introduction and your speech. But anyway, after your introduction, of course, comes your body. And you have your first main point, which takes the form of what we call the need. And it's made of several parts here. You want to state a statement of need for action. Okay. And again, the exact order that these things go in is kind of up to you. Sometimes people get the idea that they should maybe describe the symptoms or the effects of a problem. Have you ever been something like, have you ever been walking on campus and started coughing? And then you realize you're coughing because you're inhaling a lot of tobacco smoke from a restroom inside a non-smoking building. You can put that up here, and then maybe have your statement of a need for action later and say, after that sentence, you might say something. That's why we need to take action and create more designated smoking places on campus that are well ventilated. So the order can be different, but the ideas need to all be here in your main point 1. So you need a statement of need for action where, that's pretty self-explanatory. You state to the audience why you need to act, okay? Why the problem isn't going away. You need to describe what the problem is. And you can do that, this should be really indented here, I guess, but you do that by describing the signs, symptoms, or effects of the problem. And of course, you want to include some kind of example or a narrative. Narrative means story, so you can tell them a story, or a testimony, which would be like a quote from an expert source, okay, or a knowledgeable source. So an example could be, I guess I use the word should here, but I suppose I should use the word could. You could have a broad statistic followed by a specific example. So for example, you might have, 4 million people suffer from drain clogging hair, and then you can bring up that, specifically, my Uncle Harry drowned in the bathtub clogged with hair. when I wrote this, I was kind of running on empty. um, and I was feeling a little punny that day, I guess. But that's kind of an example pattern that's pretty effective. Speeches that are full of broad statistics tend to sound boring because it's just numbers. And let's face it, aside from some key people that are interested in mathematics, listening to numbers a lot is not interesting. However, what is interesting are specific examples that involve people, not necessarily people that you know, as the case in this example, but stories that involve, or testimony that involves people that actually experienced the problem that you're trying to describe. So even though it might be one or two people or a group of people that you're talking about, it really builds an image of what this abstract number represents. So that's why you would do it. And similarly, you might have a speech that's just full of stories about people that are, plagued with clogged hair, but then, people in the audience, especially if they're skeptical of this problem, might decide that you're really just talking about a couple people and that there's really no need for them personally to act because it's just a couple of weird people that have funny names that match with their problems, and it's not much of a concern. But then when they hear that it affects actually lots of people, then their attitude is changed. Right? So I find that having a mixture of both statistics and either a story, narrative, or testimony will serve you better than trying to go all one or all the other. After that, you have your main point 2, which is you would present a solution that tries to satisfy the need. So you would describe the solution. You would explain how the solution satisfies the need. So you would describe that your basic description in this running example I have about smoking places on campus. You might say that a good solution will be to create several secluded but still open air spaces for people to go smoke that look nice and are pleasant. That's the description of the solution. The solution would satisfy the need for more smoking spaces because they would be conveniently placed throughout campus. They'd be aesthetically attractive, so people wouldn't mind being there. And then you might also describe we can implement this solution by rolling up our sleeves, putting on gloves, and starting to plant privacy hedges and putting nice benches down in places in the middle of campus as opposed to the extremities of campus for people to go smoke. Okay, and depending on what your problem is and really what your solution is, you can have what we call a plan of action, in which case all a plan of action is a step-by-step. Okay, I think I mistyped here because this should also be indented a little bit. But the idea is that you have a plan. If you have a complicated thing that you want to do, not necessarily complicated, that has a bad connotation. If you have a complex solution that you are proud of, then you want a plan of action. You would go step by step about what to do. Other times your solution might not take up, this main point may not take up a lot of your speech. Maybe your solution really is to pass a law. And you would say, we can solve this problem by passing HB1. HB1 does this, that, and the other. That would be your description of the solution. Your plan of action would simply be to encourage the audience to pressure their legislators to do that. And that doesn't really take a long time. So in that case, probably most of your time is going to be spent on the need step, on the first main point. That's okay. It doesn't matter. All it really matters is that it makes sense. And then after your second main point, this is a 2 main point type speech, is your conclusion, in which you summarize what you've said already, just like you did in the informative speech. You want to tie it back to the audience, just like you did in the informative speech. And in this case, your concluding remark should be a call to action. So if you're trying to sell them a product, for example, you would conclude your speech by urging them to buy a product. If your solution is to get raise votes for a particular legislative change, you would urge them to vote a particular way. If your solution was a long step-by-step plan that you spent a lot of time detailing, then your call to action here will kind of be a very quick summary of what your audience to do. And again, that repetition is important. Sometimes people, will have their call to action or whatever in their summary up here, and that's fine too. Like I said, some of these areas I can envision situations where some of these areas can overlap, but the idea is that you need to have these elements present. You do need to summarize everything that you said in your speech, and you do need to have some kind of concluding call to action that your audience can do, and you do need to tie the audience to your speech in general before you go or you stop talking. So as long as these three things get done, it doesn't matter what order they're in, as long as that order makes sense to you. No ACD. I just realized that. But ABC, it makes sense, and they can go in any order. It's weird. I have used this PowerPoint basically unaltered for years. No one has ever caught me on that. So really, that's what persuasion speeches are basically. Here, let's bring up some visual information. Now, one thing that students are kind of curious about is that, okay, so you've just described, very briefly, Mr. Pike, that we need to have a description of the need and that we need to have a detailed solution. But within those broad ideas, Weisenheimer, how exactly do we go about it? And the way you go about it is that you construct what we call arguments. Arguments are kind of discrete chunks of persuasive speaking, and they follow a simple three-step model that really in the English language, again, you can't really avoid going out of order in this particular sense, because then people listening or the English speakers listening won't necessarily understand or connect the dots very well. And ironically, English speakers probably have the most trouble with this. I'll explain that in a second too. But here we go. So within your need step and within your solution step, you need to make an argument for something. And arguments have three components that you have to have in order for people to kind of make sense of it and to judge it as credible enough to act upon. Okay? And this is kind of like an involuntary thing that humans do. They look for these three parts. If one of them is missing, especially if the audience member is skeptical, they are not likely to believe what you're saying. Okay? So let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing that you need to start out each, we would probably call them sub-points in your main points. So you would have your main point here, right here, where you have a statement of need for action. But then after that, you need to kind of convince the audience why it's a problem, right? And this is how you would do that. You would start with a claim, which is a statement you want the audience to believe. So for this outline here, your statement of need for action would be the claim for that would be like I said, in our continuing example would be the claim would be whatever I want the audience to believe about smoking places on campus. So in this case, it'd be something like, because we don't have enough places to smoke on campus, litter is increasing on campus. Okay, so a statement you want the audience to believe. So let's write this in like litter is increasing on campus because there are too few places to smoke. Also, I just saw that my viewer count jumped up again. Welcome, everybody. If you have a question or want me to go back and review something, go ahead and say something in chat. Be mindful of the delay. So I'm not ignoring you. It just takes a while for things to get through. But anyway, let's go ahead and keep going. So a claim might be litter is increasing on campus because there are too few places to smoke. After that, you would want perhaps to cite your source. Because you just said something that needs to be substantiated. And so you might want to start this next part with a source citation. This part can kind of get swapped around a little bit, but not. But you can't go. You do not. Let me emphasize this. You do not cite a source at the very beginning of your main points or at the very beginning of a sub point. A source citation always comes after a statement you want the audience to believe. It can go maybe after the third part I'm going to talk about, or it can go right here where I have it here on this diagram, but it should never, ever, 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 ever go first. Anyway, you would cite your source, and again, I even wrote this here, I guess, as a reminder. Cite your source by saying something like according to, and then you would have an author, have the author, publication, and date, published, or access, right? And you would probably do it in that order. And then you would have what we call data. This is the fully the second part. Okay, so you would cite your source, and then you would actually describe the data. And this would be a quote or description of the information you have found that you supports your claim. All right, so maybe in this case we found, according to John Smith, writing for the Daily News, which is Ball State's on-campus paper, on October 32nd, 2020. And a very futuristic date there. He says, most people are like electrons when it comes to litter. Will take path of least resistance always. That's why least resistance always. That's why so many people just cast out their cigarette butts. However, smoking area conveniently placed a trash can that can serve this. Okay. So that was a good quote there. It's nice and long. It seems to explain itself. Those are all the things that you kind of look for in a good quote. In this case, this would be the. It wouldn't be an example or a statistic or a story. In this case, this is what we call testimony. However, it does everything you want it to do, but there's still one more part of an argument left, and that's what we call a warrant. Right? And a warrant is an explanation why your data supports your claim. So even though this information kind of stands on its own, it does a pretty good explanation about why people litter outside of designated smoking areas. You still need to make the explanation of how that substantiates your belief that litter is increasing on campus because there are too few places to smoke. So you would have to say something like, and then I'll put this in parentheses too, would say something like, since our campus is only 2 smoking places on the extreme ends campus, people who want to smoke middle of campus are, let's see, what do I want to say here, are irresistibly have an irresistible urge to live. Go. Irritable, irresistible, irresist. Oh my goodness, I'm missing the whole middle of that word. Okay, so that would be this. All these things together would create a complete argument. So at the end of the day, would have an outline that looks kind of like this, right? So let's go ahead and just kind of put everything in the parentheses on its own. And this is how you would read it, okay? Again, it's important, not necessarily how it's formatted, it's just important that all these elements are there and in roughly this order. What I was kind of ranting about earlier about citing your source, it is possible, depending on what grammar you want or what grammar you need, to put the source citation after what your data is. Okay, it's possible, but you can't really put it before. You can't put any of this. You can't put data or a warrant before your claim, because the data and the warrant modify your claim. Okay, they validate your claim. So without knowing what that claim is, people can't make sense of what you're trying to tell them. Okay, but in any case, this is how you would read this particular subpoint within your speech. You would just read the claim would go first. It's the topic sentence. As you notice, this is a paragraph here. Claim is the topic sentence. Data is in the middle, and your warrant's wrapping things up. On to the next one. So that's how you can construct any of these points here. So you have a statement of need for action. That's going to be like a 3 claim data warrant set. Your description of the problem is probably going to take a similar form. Right, now this one might be a little bit more informative in nature, where you maybe don't need a claim. You can just kind of literally describe what the problem is. But here, when you talk about the signs, symptoms, and effects of the problem, and this is maybe a critique that I have about global warming speeches. I believe in global warming, but when I look at people that talk about it, they do a very sloppy job of using persuasive claims, data, and warrants when they're speaking about it in public. When people express doubt of this particular issue, instead they tend to get frustrated and they break the pattern and end up sounding incomprehensible. So don't do that. So anyway, the point is that when you describe signs and symptoms and effects of problems, you do want to have a claim, data, and warrant for all of those things. And examples, narratives, or testimony, that's just kind of, again, getting you to try to mix around what your data you have. So if you look at the, let's actually look at the details of the persuasive speech. So this will make sense. So some general details here. The time limit is between 5 to 8 minutes. Please no more than 8 minutes. This is our last speech. You don't necessarily need to make it into a 16-minute manifesto. 5 minutes is plenty. Don't go way less than 5 minutes. 4 minutes, 45 seconds, we're still good. But 5 to 8 minutes. Don't go much over 8, please. That's the time limit. The sources you need are 3 sources. So what this means is that somewhere in your speech, you need to have at least 3 claim data warrant sets somewhere in that speech. Okay. I don't care where they are, whether they're in the need step or the solution step, or if that technically you've jammed it into your introduction or your conclusion. You've got to have 3 places where you have a source citation. Okay. And that therefore means that you'll have 3 places where you mention data, and therefore 3 places where you make a claim and a warrant. 3 sources. Again, I don't really care if there are sources like they can all be web pages, they can all be books, or they can be a mixture of web pages and books, or a mixture of web page, book, magazine. Um, I don't necessarily care what type of source it is, but 3 different sources somewhere in your speech. That means 3 different citations somewhere in your speech. Okay, and let's see here. Yeah, I think that's that's it for the basic details. It should outline format. It should follow prose sequence, which you talked about earlier, and again is in your book as speech outline. There is also a more generalized persuasive speech outline in your book, and even though I'm giving you explicit instructions here to use the group speech outline, I'm not going to penalize you for using the thing that's clearly labeled persuasive speech outline. Just know that that outline is also actually following Monroe's motivated sequence too. It's just assuming that you've had some practice with it already and that it doesn't need to prompt you very specifically to get certain things on there. So I recommend that you follow the group speech outline, not the one that's labeled persuasive speech outline. I know that's confusing, but when this course was created, the Monroe's motivated sequence outline is the one that we want students to follow to learn as persuasive speaking as a result of our course. Again, the more general persuasive speech outline is just like, okay, here's main point 1, and it's just blank. Well, main point 1, as you know, is supposed to be the need, right? So it doesn't have a lot of information there, whereas the group speech outline is really what you're looking for. I just thought I'd throw that out there. So let's see. That's it. So the due date. I know that this is probably what you're really concerned about. This is also in the announcement tonight as well. The due date for this speech is going to be July 21st, which you'll probably recognize as being next Friday. Not this coming Friday, but next Friday. This is the last day of summer session 2. Okay? If you turn it in on this day, I can give you feedback for your speech. However, if you want to request, and I would like for you to request this before before July 21st, please. Get in there. So before July 21st. You could turn it in Monday morning at 7 a.m. Okay, that would be the following Monday morning. So not this Monday morning, but whatever the Monday morning is after that. So let's see, 22nd, it'll be Monday morning, July 24 at 7 a.m. This option, if you choose to take this option, it gives you more time, but I probably cannot give you feedback. I will just rate you and move on to the next speech. Okay. The reason why is because on one hand, I want you to have enough time to do what you need to do. But on the other hand, I have a hard deadline within my, well, all professors do actually, to have your grades done and submitted to the registrar at 4 p.m. on Monday, and I can't miss that deadline. So this represents the last possible time that you could turn it in to me and that I could grade it. Now, if you turned it in at 7:05 or 7:15 a.m., I mean, that's not a big deal. But I really cannot get it graded before this point. If you turned it in much after 7 a.m. on Monday, I'm just not going to have the time. Because also remember that I have other teaching responsibilities that I need to get to as well. So it's going to be a busy day, and if you turn it in the morning, I'll be able to get to it, but I probably cannot give you feedback. I will just rate you and move on. If you turn it in here, then there's not going to be a problem. I'll do it over the weekend. Not a big deal. and you can get your feedback. Now, of course, if you get the later due date and you really want feedback, send me an email after Monday, Tuesday morning, and say, hey, I know that grades were due yesterday, but when you get a chance, can you give me some feedback? I'll be happy to do that for you. Just know that you won't receive feedback by the time your report card comes out. Did I just call it a report card? I am such a high school teacher sometimes still. I can't get it to you before the transcripts will come. But I can, I will definitely give you feedback if you request it. So anyway, I wanted to make sure that you knew that this was available, but I also wanted to know that the caveat was behind that. All right, so we're kind of wrapping up at an hour here. This is the main thing that I want you to be able to know in terms of skill and curriculum, persuasive speech. Again, if you have any questions, do continue to email me. As of right now, at 8:50 p.m. on Wednesday, July 12th, I think I am all caught up with my correspondence. So I do feel that I have done that. Have an email that I haven't responded to, please let me know. As my announcement here mentions, I did miss a couple, like a day and a half of internet access because of the weather. And I think a lot of you also did because of, well, just the number of people emailing me about it. But anyway, I think I'm all caught up now. If not, also, by the way, a lot of people, actually one person pointed out to me that I had forgotten to post the notes. So notes from broadcast July 12th. That on there. I'll make sure that everybody gets these. Oop. Ooh. There we go. Now the last two things that we need to talk about tonight would be your other two assignments, which are the discussion boards. Let's go ahead and have a look-see. So we have here persuasive speech topics and informative speech peer feedback activity. So let's go ahead and talk about the one that's, I guess, the most recent here. For this part of your weekly assignment, I need you to do two things. There's an assignment where it's kind of like just like you did for the informative speech with a little bit of a difference. So I need you to create a thread and tell us what your persuasive speech topic is by Sunday, July 6th. July 6th? Well, you have no hope of completing that. Let's fix that. I don't even think July 6th was a Sunday. I meant the 16th. Another 4 days from now. Create a topic and tell us what your persuasive speech is. As part of that thread, diagram your speech by telling us the problem, the need, and the solution, or whatever call to action you choose. Remember, you don't necessarily need a step-by-step plan, but you do need to detail a solution or have something that you want people to do as a result of listening to your speech. As you do this, as always, be sure to continue to think about potential sources of noise that receivers could experience during your speech. What are they? What are you going to do to keep that from happening? However, there's a third part here that's different from your informative speech. Your audience might experience a significant amount of cognitive dissonance. That means they might get distracted because they're a little upset from being bombarded with a message that they disagree with. This is unfortunately a problem. We'll hear messages that they're not in favor of. They get confused, or maybe they get angry, and this can interfere with their ability to understand what's coming next in your speech. So, what steps would you take to make your message more palatable? And by that I mean, what would you do to make your message seem less harsh, but you still have your position. You're not interested in changing your position on a controversial issue just because someone might disagree with it. Quite the opposite. I want you to be able to meet controversy and meet disagreement head on, but you need to do it in a way that doesn't deliberately aggravate people. So for example, for this part, you might say that you're giving a speech against abortion. But you know that a lot of people that are pro-choice, you know, there can be, this is a topic where both sides actually are very militant, very aggressive. And so instead of, your step might be, instead of calling people who are pro-choice baby killers, I will simply refer to them as people in favor of pro-choice. That was a very handy example for me, and I know it's a controversial topic, but I'm basically asking you, how will you deal with with people being offended from what you might say? If you were giving a speech to a group of people that already agree that abortion is wrong or that abortion is murder, you might go ahead and say that abortion is murder. But when you have a mixed audience or an audience that you feel is skeptical of that idea, you don't want to start your speech that way. It's going to get them upset or confused. They'll shut down. They won't listen to what you have to say. No one likes to be accused of killing anything. So what will you do to kind of soften your message, to make it less harsh, to make it more palatable? Palatable means, literally means to taste good. So how will you make your message that you know people might disagree with, how will you make that taste good to them? So that's what I'm asking you to do in this third part here. That's a little different from your informative speech. But then anyway, after that, by Wednesday, so that's 7 days from now, you need to reply to 2 other students' topics, talking about whether you'd be interested in that speech. Please, again, be kind. You know, you were fairly good at that this time, so I'm not worried about that. And then help them brainstorm some places they can find some cited material. Let's go ahead and make that change there. Impossible due date I gave you. I hope you guys were around. I hope you were all around last week on July 6th to do this assignment. Oh no, no one turned it in. Tisk tisk. Times typos. Okay. The other discussion assignment you have this week is the informative speech peer feedback activity. This also is fairly straightforward. By Friday, July 14th, so as you can tell, that's within 2 days from now, go to the discussion board and upload/give a YouTube link for your persuasive video. See, look at that. I had different speeches on my brain, and now I'm confused. Well, your informative video, under your group, and I did that writing from the idea that I was giving this thing to multiple sections. So let's see, I made it right. Yep, watch your. No, that's okay. Watch your group speeches. Watch your classmates' speeches is what I'm trying to tell you there. Okay, so give an upload link for your informative persuasive. Goodness gravy. Well, anyway, upload it by July 14th. Then 3 days later, you would like to watch. I would like for you to watch 4 groups. I would like, I wasn't very specific there. Watch 3 classmates' speeches and write each person one thing you liked about their speech, one thing you really could do to improve. Again, be kind. Don't tell them that you suck, and that the only way to improve is to get a new vocal cord. No, don't be a troll, okay? But give them something that you think they could do better next time, and make it concrete. Say something like, the lighting in your video was kind of distracting. Move that light into the back of the room. Something like that. And then one other thing you really liked about their speech. In teaching, we call this setup the sandwich. One positive thing, one improvement, end on a positive note. That's what we call the sandwich. So the whole post for each person you review is just 3 sentences minimum. And then let's write this in here because I forgot. Please, I'm going to shout it at you. Please prioritize people not already have feedback. So if you see that somebody already has 2 or 3 posts on their thread for their speech, maybe you skip that person and go to someone who only has 0 or 1. So that way everybody gets some feedback. Again, you folks were fairly good with that on the last activity that I structured this way. Just keep it up. Let's delete this last little persuasive here. So some of you might be wondering, just because it's a forum post, how you might post your speech here. So I'll just show you the interface here. If you just hit create thread, type in your subject like my informative speech. You can attach a file. So if you attached a file for me, you just go ahead and attach the same one. Similarly, if you did a YouTube video, you can just copy and paste the link. So, well, now of course I thought I was going to post a YouTube, but you would copy and paste the link in there, and then you would hit submit, and there you go. All right. So either way you turned in your speech to me, you can turn it in on the discussion board for others to see. So yes, those are your assignments. If you have any questions, please do email me. If you're out there in the live audience, I'm going to stick around to answer those questions. I didn't see anyone write in chat tonight, but we do have a handful of people watching, so I'll stick around after this turns off to answer your questions. But I mean, we're up here right at an hour, so I've taken up enough of your time. Please do. I mean, we're at the final stretch here. Next week, we're going to go over an example persuasive speech, and I will probably produce a last-minute video next, not this coming weekend, but the one following, right before grades are due. That kind of gives my overall evaluation of the class so far and how you guys did. But anyway, thanks so much for watching tonight, or this morning, or this afternoon, whenever it is that you saw this. Have a great and have a great day. All right, I see that some people do have questions for afterwards, so I'll stick around for the button to turn this off, and I will see you all later. Same time next week.